The woman stumbled into Eureka, Nevada, with nothing but torn clothes and bleeding feet, her dark hair matted with dust from the long road that had nearly killed her. Penelope Graham did not remember much about the last 3 days, only that the wagon train she had been traveling with was gone, destroyed by a terrible fire that started when lightning struck during a storm 2 nights back. Everyone she had known for the past 6 months, every soul who might have called her friend or companion, was dead or scattered to the desert winds. She had no family waiting for her in California, no husband or children, no parents or siblings anywhere in this vast country. The wagon train had been her last hope for a new beginning after losing everything back east, and now even that was gone. The year was 1878, and the Nevada desert showed no mercy to those who wandered alone. Penelope had somehow found the strength to keep walking after the fire, following what she hoped was a road, praying for water, for shade, for any sign of human habitation. When she finally saw the buildings of Eureka shimmering in the distance, she thought it might be a mirage, some cruel trick her dying mind was playing on her. But the town was real. The buildings were real. The people staring at her as she dragged herself down the main street were real. Penelope made it as far as the livery stable before her legs gave out completely. She collapsed in the dirt, too exhausted even to break her fall, and the last thing she heard before darkness claimed her was a man's voice, deep and urgent, calling for help. When consciousness returned, it came slowly, bringing with it the sensation of cool cloth on her forehead and the smell of something cooking. Penelope opened her eyes to find herself lying on a narrow bed in a small, neat room. Sunlight streamed through a single window, and she could hear voices outside, the sound of horses, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. "You are awake." The voice came from beside the bed, and Penelope turned her head to see a woman sitting in a wooden chair, holding a bowl of water and a cloth. She was older, perhaps 50, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a bun. "Do not try to sit up yet. You have been through quite an ordeal." Penelope's throat was so dry she could barely speak. "Where am I?" "You are in Eureka, in the home of Dr. Hayes. I am his wife, Martha." The woman wrung out the cloth and placed it on Penelope's forehead again. "My husband treated your feet and gave you something to help you sleep. You have been unconscious for nearly a full day." The memories came flooding back then, the fire, the screaming, the endless walking through the desert. Penelope closed her eyes against the sudden sting of tears. "The others," she whispered. "Everyone else from the wagon train." "The cowboy who found you rode out to look this morning," Martha said gently. "He found the remains of the wagons about 15 miles west of here. I am sorry, dear. There were no other survivors." The tears came then, hot and bitter. Penelope had not been close to all the people on that wagon train, but they had been her traveling companions, her last connection to anything resembling community or purpose. And now they were gone, burned alive or died from injuries sustained in the chaos. "What will happen to me?" Penelope asked when she could speak again. "I have no money, no possessions. Everything burned." Martha's expression was troubled. "We will figure something out. For now, you need to rest and recover your strength. My husband says you are lucky to be alive. Another few hours in that desert and you would not have made it." Over the next few days, Penelope slowly regained her strength. Dr. Hayes was a gentle, scholarly man who checked on her regularly, changing the bandages on her feet and making sure she ate enough. Martha brought her meals and sat with her in the evenings, telling her about life in Eureka, a mining town that had seen better days but still held on with stubborn determination. It was during one of these evening conversations that Penelope finally asked about the man who had found her. "Oh, that would be Thomas Tucker," Martha said, her face brightening. "He owns a cattle ranch about 5 miles outside of town. Good man, though he keeps mostly to himself these days. He came into town that day to get supplies when he saw you collapse, carried you here himself." "I should thank him," Penelope said. "He has been by a few times to check on you, but you were always sleeping," Martha replied. "I expect he will come by again soon." Thomas Tucker appeared the next afternoon, hat in hand, standing awkwardly in the doorway of the room where Penelope was finally strong enough to sit up in bed. He was tall, probably in his late 20s, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the edges. His eyes were an unusual shade of gray-green, and there was something both gentle and cautious in the way he looked at her. "Miss Graham," he said, his voice the same deep tone she had heard before losing consciousness. "I am glad to see you are recovering." "Mr. Tucker," Penelope replied, trying to smooth down her borrowed nightgown and feeling suddenly self-conscious. "I wanted to thank you for helping me. If you had not found me when you did, I would surely have died." Thomas stepped into the room but did not come too close, as if he was worried about making her uncomfortable. "Anyone would have done the same. You looked like you had been through hell itself." "I suppose I had," Penelope said quietly. "The doctor told me you rode out to the wagon train." "Or what was left of it." His expression grew somber. "I did. I am sorry for your loss. It must have been a terrible thing to survive." They talked for a while longer carefully, like two people trying to find their footing on unfamiliar ground. Thomas told her about his ranch, the Thunder Creek Ranch, named for the small creek that ran through his property and roared during spring floods. He had inherited it from his father 5 years ago and had been running it alone ever since, with just a few hired hands who came and went with the seasons. "It is hard work," he admitted, "but it is mine. I like the independence of it, the knowing that I am building something that will last." Penelope found herself drawn to the quiet pride in his voice, the way his whole demeanor changed when he talked about his land and his cattle. There was something solid about Thomas Tucker, something dependable in a world that had shown her nothing but chaos and loss lately. When Martha came to tell Thomas that Penelope needed to rest, he stood and replaced his hat, nodding politely. "I hope you will feel better soon, Miss Graham. Please call me Penelope." A small smile crossed his face. "Only if you call me Thomas." After he left, Martha gave Penelope a knowing look. "He is a good man," she said again, with more emphasis this time. "I barely know him," Penelope protested, but she could feel her cheeks warming. "True enough," Martha agreed, "but you will have time to remedy that, I think." A week after arriving in Eureka, Penelope was well enough to leave the doctor's house, but the question of where she would go and what she would do hung over her like a storm cloud. She had no money, no belongings, and no family to turn to. The harsh reality was that a woman alone in the West had very few options, and most of them were not pleasant. Dr. Hayes and his wife offered to let her stay with them for a while longer, but Penelope could see the strain in their faces. They were kind people, but they were not wealthy, and an extra mouth to feed was a burden they could not afford indefinitely. "I could look for work," Penelope suggested. "Perhaps as a seamstress or a cook. I can read and write as well. Maybe the school teacher needs help." Martha shook her head sadly. "The school already has a teacher, and there is not enough work in town for a seamstress. Most families make their own clothes or do without. As for cooking, the only place that needs help is the saloon, and I would not recommend that for a young woman alone." Penelope understood what she meant. Working in a saloon often meant more than just serving drinks, and she was not desperate enough for that, not yet. It was Thomas who offered a solution, though not in the way anyone expected. He came to visit Penelope again a few days later, and this time he asked if she felt strong enough to take a short walk. With Martha's permission and a shawl around her shoulders, Penelope accompanied him outside for the first time since her arrival in Eureka. The September air was crisp and clean, and Penelope breathed deeply, grateful to be out of the sick room. They walked slowly down the main street, Thomas matching his pace to hers, his hands clasped behind his back. "I have been thinking about your situation," Thomas said after a few minutes of comfortable silence. "And I have a proposition for you if you will hear it." Penelope glanced at him warily. "What kind of proposition?" "A practical one," he assured her quickly. "My ranch needs help. I have been trying to run it alone, but it is too much for one man. I need someone to manage the house, to keep accounts, to help with the daily tasks that I do not have time for. In return, I can offer you room and board, a small wage, and the safety of having a place to call home." It was a generous offer, more than generous, and Penelope knew it. But she also knew the potential scandal of an unmarried woman living on a ranch with an unmarried man, no matter how proper the arrangement. "People would talk," she said quietly. "Let them," Thomas replied with surprising firmness. "I know what it is like to be alone, to have nowhere to turn. When my father died, I had neighbors who helped me when they could have just as easily left me to fail. I believe in repaying that kindness when I can." They walked a bit further, Penelope considering his words. Finally, she asked, "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Thomas stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Because everyone deserves a chance to start over. Because I saw you collapse in the street, and something in me could not stand the thought of you suffering anymore. Because my ranch is big and empty, and having someone else there might make it feel less lonely." He paused, then added more quietly, "And because you do not feel like a stranger to me, even though we have only just met." Penelope felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. She looked into Thomas's eyes and saw only honesty there and kindness and something else she was not quite ready to name. "I accept your offer," she said, "and I promise to work hard and earn my keep." Relief washed over Thomas's face. "I do not doubt it. When you are ready to travel, I will come get you and bring you out to the ranch." 3 days later, Penelope found herself seated beside Thomas on the bench of his wagon, her few borrowed belongings in a small bag at her feet. Martha Hayes had insisted on giving her several dresses, a coat, and various necessities, refusing to take no for an answer. Dr. Hayes had checked her feet one last time and declared them healed enough for normal activity, though he cautioned her to take it easy for a few more weeks. The ride to Thunder Creek Ranch took about an hour, following a dusty road that wound through rocky terrain dotted with sagebrush and occasional stands of pinyon pine. Thomas pointed out various landmarks as they went, telling her about the land and its history. "My father bought this land 25 years ago, back when Nevada was still a territory," he explained. "He came out here from Missouri with nothing but a dream and enough stubbornness to make it real. Built the house himself, started the herd with just a dozen head of cattle. By the time I was old enough to help, he had built something worth being proud of." "You must miss him," Penelope said. "Every day," Thomas admitted. "But I feel close to him when I am working the land he loved. It is like he is still here in some way, watching to make sure I do not mess it all up." Penelope smiled at that, understanding the sentiment even though her own relationship with her parents had been more complicated. Her father had died when she was young, and her mother had remarried a man who made it clear that Penelope was not welcome in his home. She had left at 18, determined to make her own way in the world, and had been struggling to do so ever since. The ranch house appeared in the distance, a low structure built of timber and stone with a wide porch across the front. It was surrounded by several outbuildings, A barn, a stable, a smokehouse, and what looked like a bunkhouse. Beyond the buildings, Penelope could see cattle grazing in the distance, and the glint of water that must be Thunder Creek itself. "It is beautiful," she said, and meant it. There was something peaceful about the place, something that called to a part of her she had not known existed. Thomas helped her down from the wagon with a steadying hand on her elbow. "Welcome to Thunder Creek Ranch," he said. "Your home, for as long as you need it to be." The inside of the house was clean but Spartan, clearly the domain of a man who spent most of his time outdoors. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace, a wooden table and chairs, and a few pieces of worn but serviceable furniture. 2 doors led off the main room, and Thomas showed her the one on the left. "This was my parents' room," he said, opening the door to reveal a modest bedroom with a real bed frame, a dresser, and a small window that looked out toward the creek. "I have been sleeping in the other room since my father passed. I thought you would be more comfortable in here." The room was clean, the bed made up with fresh linens, and there was even a vase of wildflowers on the dresser. Penelope felt her throat tighten at the thoughtfulness of it. "It is perfect," she managed to say. "Thank you, Thomas." He ducked his head, looking pleased but embarrassed. "I will let you settle in. When you are ready, come out to the kitchen and I will show you where everything is." Life on Thunder Creek Ranch fell into a rhythm more quickly than Penelope had expected. She woke each morning before dawn to start the fire and prepare breakfast, finding a strange satisfaction in the simple domestic tasks. Thomas was usually up even earlier, already out checking on the cattle or mending fences, or doing any of the 100 tasks that kept a ranch running. They ate breakfast together most mornings, talking about the day's plans. Thomas was easy to talk to, Penelope discovered, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh when she least expected it. He listened when she talked, really listened, and remembered little things she mentioned in passing. After breakfast, Thomas would head out to work the ranch while Penelope tackled the housework, the mending, and the endless task of keeping their supplies organized and accounted for. Thomas had not been exaggerating when he said he needed help with accounts. His record-keeping was haphazard at best, and Penelope spent several days just sorting through bills and receipts and trying to figure out exactly what he owed and to whom. "You are a miracle worker," Thomas declared when she showed him her organized ledgers. "I have been dreading dealing with all that for months." "It is just basic bookkeeping," Penelope said, but she was pleased by his praise nonetheless. "You should be getting better prices for your cattle, though. I think the buyer in Eureka has been taking advantage of you." Thomas frowned. "What makes you say that?" "I found some old newspapers with market prices listed. He is paying you at least 20% less than the going rate." She showed him the numbers, explaining her reasoning, and watched as his expression shifted from surprise to irritation. "I trusted him," Thomas said quietly. "His father did business with my father for years." "Then perhaps he does not realize the prices have changed," Penelope suggested diplomatically, though she suspected otherwise. "Either way, you should ask for fair market value." The next time Thomas took cattle to market, he came back with a significantly better price and a newfound appreciation for Penelope's head for business. "You were right," he admitted. "He tried to give me the same low price, but when I showed him the market prices, he suddenly found the money to pay fairly." As the weeks passed, Penelope found herself settling into ranch life in a way she had never expected. The work was hard, but it was honest, and there was something deeply satisfying about going to bed tired each night knowing she had earned her keep. More than that, she was beginning to feel at home here, in a way she had not felt anywhere since childhood. Part of that, she had to admit, was Thomas himself. He was unlike any man she had ever known, thoughtful and hardworking, with a quiet strength that did not need to prove itself. He treated her with respect, never making her feel like a servant or an obligation, but rather like a partner whose contributions mattered. She caught herself watching him sometimes, admiring the easy way he moved, the competence with which he handled the animals and the land. And sometimes she caught him watching her too, his expression soft and unguarded before he realized she had noticed and looked away. It was dangerous, she knew, to let her feelings develop in this direction. Thomas had offered her a job and a home, nothing more. Reading anything else into his kindness would be foolish and potentially disastrous. But her heart did not seem to care about logic or caution, and with each passing day, she found it harder to ignore the warmth that spread through her chest whenever Thomas smiled at her. October brought cooler weather and the first real test of their partnership. Thomas had to move a portion of his herd to winter pasture, and the two men he had hired to help with the drive both came down with influenza at the last minute. Without enough hands to manage the cattle, the whole operation was in jeopardy. "I will help," Penelope said when Thomas explained the problem over dinner. He looked at her in surprise. "Have you ever worked cattle before?" "No," she admitted, "but I can learn." "You said yourself it is only about 15 miles to the winter pasture. How hard can it be?" Thomas laughed, but it was a warm sound, not mocking. "Famous last words, but if you are serious, I will take all the help I can get. It will be hard work, though, and we will be gone for at least 3 days. Then we should pack enough supplies," Penelope said practically. They set out 2 days later, moving the herd slowly north and east toward higher ground where the cattle could graze through the winter. Penelope had never spent so many hours in a saddle, and by the end of the first day, she was sore in places she did not know could be sore. But she did not complain, determined to pull her weight. Thomas was patient with her, showing her how to position herself to keep the cattle moving in the right direction, how to read the animals' behavior, when to push, and when to let them rest. It was exhausting, dusty work, but there was also something exhilarating about it, about being out on the open range with nothing but the sky above and the land stretching endlessly in all directions. They made camp that night near a small spring, and Thomas showed Penelope how to set up a proper bedroll and build a cooking fire that would not spook the cattle. They ate beans and hardtack and drank strong coffee, and Penelope thought it was one of the best meals she had ever had. "You did well today," Thomas said as they sat by the fire, the cattle settling down for the night nearby. "Better than I expected for your first time." "I am going to be unbearably sore tomorrow," Penelope admitted. "Probably," Thomas agreed with a grin, "but it gets easier. And for what it is worth, I am glad you are here. This would be nearly impossible alone." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire and listening to the sounds of the night. Then Thomas said quietly, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What were you going to do in California? Before the wagon train was attacked, what were you hoping to find there?" Penelope considered the question, trying to remember the person she had been just a few months ago, full of vague hopes and desperate plans. "Honestly, I did not really know. I had heard there were opportunities there, that a person could start fresh without their past following them. I thought maybe I could find work as a teacher or a governess, something respectable. But mostly I was just running away from where I had been." "And now?" Thomas asked. "Now I am not sure I need California anymore," Penelope said softly. "I think I might have found what I was looking for right here." When she looked up, she found Thomas watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. The firelight played across his features, softening the hard lines, and she could see in his eyes that he felt it too, this pull between them that had been growing stronger with each passing day. "Penelope," he said, and the way he spoke her name made it sound like a prayer. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" Thomas took a breath, clearly gathering his courage. "When I found you that day in Eureka, when I saw you collapse in the street, something in me knew. I cannot explain it, and I know it sounds foolish, but I looked at you and I knew that you were going to change my life." Penelope's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Thomas, let me finish," he said gently. "I have been trying to convince myself that what I am feeling is just gratitude, or companionship, or simple loneliness. But it is not any of those things, or maybe it is all of them and something more besides. I am falling in love with you, Penelope. Maybe I have been since the moment I first saw you. And I know I have no right to say this, that you came here looking for safety, and I am risking that by telling you how I feel, but I cannot keep pretending anymore." For a long moment, Penelope could not speak. Joy and fear warred in her chest, along with a relief so profound it made her dizzy. "You are not alone in this," she finally managed to say. "I have been feeling the same way and trying just as hard to deny it." Thomas moved closer, reaching out to take her hand. His palm was rough and warm against hers. "I do not want you to think I offered you a home just because of this. My offer was genuine, and it still stands regardless of what you feel for me. But if there is a chance that you could care for me the way I care for you, then I am asking if I can court you properly. I am asking if you would consider making this ranch your home, not just as an employee, but as my partner in every sense." Penelope felt tears pricking at her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. "I would like that very much," she said. "I would like that more than anything." Thomas smiled, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and lighter. "Then I am the luckiest man in Nevada," he said, and squeezed her hand gently. They sat there by the fire for a long time, hands clasped, talking about everything and nothing. Thomas told her about growing up on the ranch, about his dreams for the future, about the loneliness that had been his constant companion since his father's death. Penelope told him about her childhood, about the mother who had chosen a new husband over her own daughter, about the years of struggling to survive on her own before joining the ill-fated wagon train. "I used to think I was cursed," Penelope admitted. "Like I was destined to lose everything I cared about." "You are not cursed," Thomas said firmly. "You are a survivor. You are strong and brave and more capable than you give yourself credit for. And you are not alone anymore. You have me, and you have Thunder Creek Ranch. This place is as much yours as it is mine, Penelope. I mean that. If something were to happen to me tomorrow, the ranch would be yours. I will have it written down legal and proper when we get back to town." "Thomas, you do not have to do that." "Yes, I do," he insisted. "You have no family, you said so yourself. But you do now. I am your family, and this ranch is your home, and that is not going to change no matter what happens between us romantically. You need to know that you are safe, that you have something permanent and real that no one can take away from you." Penelope could not hold back the tears anymore. She had spent so many years feeling rootless and unwanted, and here was this man offering her not just affection but security, not just a home but belonging. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for giving me a chance." Thomas reached up and gently wiped away her tears with his thumb. "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for trusting me enough to stay." They finished the cattle drive without incident, and when they returned to Thunder Creek Ranch, something fundamental had shifted between them. They were still careful to maintain propriety, but now there was an understanding, an acknowledged future that made every interaction sweeter. Thomas did exactly as he had promised, riding into Eureka to have papers drawn up that made Penelope a legal co-owner of the ranch. When he showed her the documents, she was overwhelmed. "This is too much," she protested. "It is not nearly enough," Thomas countered, "but it is a start." He courted her properly over the following months, bringing her wildflowers when he came in from the range, reading to her in the evenings from the few books they had in the house, teaching her to ride better and to shoot a rifle for protection. They took walks along Thunder Creek whenever they could spare the time, talking about their dreams and fears and everything in between. Thomas kissed her for the first time in late November, as the first snow of winter began to fall. They were standing on the porch watching the flakes drift down, and Penelope had made some comment about how beautiful it was. Thomas had turned to her and said, "Not as beautiful as you," and before she could respond to that, he had cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made her weak in the knees. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too," Penelope replied, breathless and happy. "So much that it scares me sometimes." "Do not be scared," Thomas said, pulling her close. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to be scared again." Winter on the ranch was both harder and easier than Penelope had expected. The work was more difficult with the cold and snow, but it also forced them to spend more time inside, cozied up by the fire in the evenings. They grew even closer during those long winter nights, learning each other's habits and quirks, settling into the comfortable intimacy of a couple who belonged together. Thomas proposed on Christmas Eve, presenting her with a simple gold ring that had belonged to his mother. "It is not fancy," he said, looking suddenly nervous, "but it was my mother's, and I cannot think of anyone else I would want to wear it. Marry me, Penelope. Make this official. Be my wife and my partner and the person I wake up next to every morning for the rest of our lives." "Yes," Penelope said without hesitation. "Yes, of course, yes." They were married in January of 1879 in a small ceremony in Eureka with Dr. Hayes and his wife as witnesses. Penelope wore a new dress that Martha had helped her make, pale blue with lace at the collar, and Thomas wore his Sunday best with his hair neatly combed. The justice of the peace pronounced them man and wife, and when Thomas kissed her, Penelope felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The wedding night was tender and a little awkward, two people learning each other in a new way, but it was also perfect because it was theirs. Thomas was gentle and patient, making sure Penelope felt safe and loved, and when they finally came together as husband and wife, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I never thought I could have this," Penelope whispered later, lying in Thomas's arms in the darkness. "A home, a husband, a real future. I had given up on the idea of being truly happy." "Well, you better get used to it," Thomas said, pressing a kiss to her forehead, "because I plan on making you happy every single day for the rest of our lives." Life as a married couple suited them both. They fell into new rhythms together, finding joy in the everyday tasks of running the ranch. Penelope took on more responsibility, managing not just the household but also the business side of things, negotiating better prices for their cattle and finding new markets for their goods. Thomas came to rely on her judgment completely, making no major decisions without consulting her first. "We are a good team," he said one evening as they went over the accounts together. "Better than I ever imagined we could be." "We are," Penelope agreed, leaning over to kiss his cheek. "I think your father would be proud of what we are building here." Spring brought new challenges and new opportunities. Thomas wanted to expand the herd, and with Penelope's careful management of their finances, they had the money to do it. They bought 50 head of good breeding stock from a rancher who was retiring and moving back east, and suddenly Thunder Creek Ranch was a much larger operation. It meant more work, and eventually they had to hire on 2 ranch hands permanently, young men from town who were happy to have steady employment. Penelope found herself managing a household staff as well as the ranch's business affairs, but she loved every minute of it. This was her life, her home, her future, and she had helped build it with her own 2 hands. In June, Penelope realized she had missed her monthly courses twice in a row and was feeling tired and slightly nauseous in the mornings. She knew what it meant even before Dr. Hayes confirmed it. "You are with child," he said, smiling. "I would say about 3 months along. The baby should arrive sometime in late November or early December." Penelope could hardly wait to tell Thomas. She rode out to where he was working on a new section of fence, barely able to contain her excitement. "Thomas," she called as she approached. "Thomas, I have news." He dropped his tools and hurried over, concern on his face. "What is wrong? Are you all right?" "Nothing is wrong. Everything is wonderful." Penelope could not keep the grin off her face. "We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Thomas just stared at her, as if he could not quite process what she had said. Then a slow, wondering smile spread across his face, and he let out a whoop of joy that probably scared every cow within a mile. He picked Penelope up and spun her around, laughing, before setting her down very carefully as if she were made of glass. "A baby," he said, his voice full of awe. "We are going to have a baby." "We are," Penelope confirmed, laughing at his expression. "Are you happy?" "Happy. I am beyond happy. I am the happiest man who ever lived." Thomas pulled her close, one hand moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "We are going to be parents. You are going to be a mother. I am going to be a father." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Penelope said softly. "Just like your father was to you." The pregnancy progressed normally, though Penelope found the summer heat particularly difficult to manage. Thomas was almost comically overprotective, insisting she rest more and do less physical labor, much to her annoyance. But she had to admit it was sweet, the way he worried about her, the way he talked to her belly at night as if the baby could already hear him. "I hope it is a boy," Thomas said one night as they lay in bed. "A strong boy who can help run the ranch someday." "And if it is a girl?" Penelope asked, amused. "Then she will be the most loved little girl in all of Nevada, and I will teach her to rope cattle and balance accounts and anything else she wants to learn," Thomas replied without hesitation. "Boy or girl, this baby is going to know every day how wanted and loved they are." The baby, as it turned out, was a boy. He arrived on a cold December night, during a snowstorm that made it impossible for Dr. Hayes to reach the ranch in time. Thomas ended up delivering his own son with the help of Martha Hayes's instructions, which she had given Penelope months earlier, in case of this exact situation. It was terrifying and beautiful and messy, and when Thomas finally placed the squalling, red-faced infant in Penelope's arms, she fell in love all over again. "He is perfect," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He is," Thomas agreed, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at her son's tiny face, Penelope knew exactly what his name should be. "Theodore," she said. "After your father, Theodore Tucker." Thomas sucked in a breath, clearly moved. "Are you sure? I thought you wanted to use a name from your family." "You are my family," Penelope said firmly. "You and this baby and this ranch. Your father built something beautiful here, and now we are building on that foundation. It feels right to honor that." They called him Theo for short, and he was indeed a perfect baby, healthy and strong with his father's gray-green eyes and his mother's dark hair. Thomas was a devoted father from the first moment, walking the floor with Theo when he cried at night, changing dirty diapers without complaint, singing off-key lullabies that somehow always worked. Watching her husband with their son, Penelope sometimes had to pinch herself to believe this was really her life. Just over a year ago, she had been dying in the desert, alone and hopeless. Now she had a husband who loved her, a beautiful son, and a home that was truly hers. The transformation was almost impossible to believe. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked one evening, catching her watching him play with Theo on the floor. "Just about how much my life has changed," Penelope admitted. "About how lucky I am to have found you." "I am the lucky one," Thomas countered, getting up and coming over to kiss her. "You gave me everything I did not know I was missing. A partner, a family, a reason to build something bigger than just a ranch." As Theo grew from an infant to a toddler, Thunder Creek Ranch continued to prosper. The herd grew larger. Their reputation for quality cattle spread throughout the region, and they were able to expand their operations even further. Penelope proved to have a natural talent for business, and under her management, the ranch became one of the most successful operations in that part of Nevada. They added onto the house when Penelope became pregnant again, building 2 new bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. Their second child, a daughter they named Grace, arrived in the spring of 1882, tiny and fierce and clearly determined to keep up with her older brother from the start. "Now our family is complete," Penelope said, cradling Grace while watching Theo attempt to climb onto Thomas's shoulders. "Is it?" Thomas asked, grinning. "I was thinking maybe we could go for 3 or 4 more. Penelope threw a pillow at him, laughing. "Let me recover from this one first, and then we will talk." Life settled into a beautiful rhythm over the next few years. The children grew, the ranch thrived, and Thomas and Penelope's love for each other only deepened with time. They had their challenges, of course. There were droughts that tested the water supply, cattle that got sick, hired hands who did not work out. But they faced everything together, as partners, and somehow that made even the hardest times bearable. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Penelope out to a hill that overlooked the ranch, the same spot where they had once moved cattle together during that first drive. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and they could see the house below, smoke rising from the chimney, cattle grazing peacefully in the pastures. "You remember when I first brought you here?" Thomas asked, his arm around her waist. "When you told me you had no family." "I remember," Penelope said softly. "I remember thinking I had lost everything. And I told you that you had family now, that the ranch was as much yours as it was mine," Thomas continued. "I want you to know that I meant every word of that. More than that, I want you to know that you gave me just as much as I gave you. You saved me, Penelope, just as surely as I saved you that day in Eureka. You made my house into a home. You turned my lonely existence into a life worth living. Everything good I have is because of you." Penelope turned in his arms to face him, cupping his face in her hands. "We saved each other," she said, "and we built something beautiful together, something that will last long after we are gone." She kissed him then, long and sweet, and when they pulled apart, Thomas was smiling that same wondering smile he had worn on their wedding day. "Come on," he said, taking her hand. "Let us go home." And they did, walking hand in hand down the hill toward their house, where their children were waiting and the lights were warm and welcoming. Penelope looked back once at the setting sun, saying a silent thank you to whatever forces of fate had brought her to Eureka that day, broken and alone. She had been lost, but she had been found. She had had no family, but now she did. And this ranch, this beautiful, thriving place, was just as much hers as it was Thomas's, exactly as he had promised from the very beginning. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and celebrations. Theo grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the ins and outs of ranching with an intensity that sometimes worried Penelope. "He is only 7, she said to Thomas one evening. "He should be playing more, being a child." "He is happy," Thomas assured her. "This is what he loves. Trust me, when he wants to play, he will. But right now, he is learning a trade that will serve him his whole life." Grace, meanwhile, was her mother's daughter through and through, more interested in numbers and books than in cattle and horses. She learned to read at 4 and was soon working through every book they could get their hands on. On trips to town, she would beg to visit the general store not for candy, but for the newspapers and catalogs, which she would pore over for hours. "We are going to have to send her to a real school soon," Penelope said. "She is too smart for me to teach her everything she needs to know." They ended up hiring a tutor who came to the ranch twice a week, a young woman from back east who was delighted to have such an eager pupil. Grace flourished under her instruction, and Penelope began to dream of perhaps sending her to a real school someday, maybe even college if such a thing was possible for a young woman. In 1885, tragedy struck when a particularly harsh winter killed a significant portion of their herd. It was a devastating blow, both financially and emotionally. Thomas blamed himself, wondering if there was something more he could have done to protect the cattle. "We will recover," Penelope said firmly, even as she tallied up the losses in her ledgers and felt her stomach sink. "We have weathered storms before, and we will weather this one. We still have the land, we still have each other, and we still have our children. Everything else we can rebuild." And they did, though it took time and effort and no small amount of sacrifice. They sold some of their land to raise quick capital, bought smaller, hardier cattle that could better survive harsh winters, and diversified their income by raising horses as well. Slowly, painfully, they clawed their way back to stability. The experience changed them both in subtle ways. Thomas became more cautious, more focused on building reserves for emergencies. Penelope became even more involved in the business side of things, researching new ranching techniques and making connections with other ranchers throughout the West. Together, they made Thunder Creek Ranch stronger and more resilient than it had ever been before. By 1890, the ranch was thriving again, bigger and better than before the winter die-off. They had rebuilt the herd, the horse breeding program was bringing in good money, and they had even opened a small trading post on their property that served the other ranchers in the area. Theo, now 11, was already more capable than many grown men, and Grace at 8 could manage the books as well as her mother. "We did it," Thomas said one night as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. It had become their ritual, these quiet evenings together after the children were in bed. "We really did it. We built something that will last." "We did," Penelope agreed, leaning against his shoulder. "And we are not done yet. There is so much more we can do, so much more we can build." In 1892, Penelope surprised them both by becoming pregnant again at the age of 36. It was unexpected and slightly terrifying given her age, but Dr. Hayes assured them that she was healthy and strong, and there was no reason to think anything would go wrong. Their third child, another boy they named Samuel, arrived without complications in the spring of 1893. Theo and Grace were both fascinated by their new baby brother, and the house rang with the sounds of a growing, happy family. 3 children, Thomas marveled, holding Samuel while Theo and Grace clamored for a turn. "When I found you in Eureka all those years ago, I never imagined this." "Any of this. Neither did I," Penelope admitted. "I thought my life was over. I thought I had lost my last chance at happiness. And instead you found more happiness than either of us knew what to do with," Thomas finished, smiling at her over the baby's head. As the century drew to a close, Thunder Creek Ranch had become one of the premier cattle operations in Nevada. They employed a dozen ranch hands year-round, had expanded their property to include nearly 10,000 acres, and were regularly consulted by other ranchers looking for advice on breeding and management. But more than the business success, what mattered most to both Thomas and Penelope was the family they had built. Theo was growing into a fine young man, strong and capable and kind, with his father's work ethic and his mother's sharp mind. Grace had indeed gone away to school, attending a prestigious academy for young women in San Francisco, and was talking about becoming a teacher herself. Even little Samuel, now 5 years old, was showing signs of being just as bright and determined as his siblings. "We are blessed," Penelope said on their 20th wedding anniversary, sitting in their now comfortable parlor, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together. Photographs of the children lined the mantelpiece. The furniture was well worn but loved, and through the window they could see the land they had fought so hard to keep and grow. "We are," Thomas agreed. He was older now, gray showing at his temples and lines around his eyes, but to Penelope, he was still the handsome cowboy who had found her dying in the street and offered her a home. "And it is all because you were brave enough to accept my offer that day, to take a chance on a stranger and a lonely ranch. You gave me everything," Penelope said softly. "A home, a family, a purpose. You gave me a reason to live when I thought I had none left." "And you gave me the same," Thomas replied, reaching for her hand. "We saved each other, remember? That is what you said all those years ago on the hill, and it is still true today." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands clasped, watching the fire crackle in the hearth. Outside, they could hear Theo calling to one of the ranch hands, Samuel's laughter as he played with the dogs, and in the distance, the lowing of cattle settling down for the night. These were the sounds of home, of family, of a life well lived. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if I had not collapsed in Eureka that day?" Penelope asked. "If I had made it another mile down the road, or if you had been later getting to town?" "I try not to," Thomas admitted. "It is too terrible to imagine. But I do think about how strange fate is, how the worst day of your life led to the best day of mine. If that wagon train had not been attacked, if you had made it to California, we never would have met." "I do not believe that," Penelope said firmly. "I think we were meant to find each other, one way or another. Maybe not in the same way, maybe not at the same time, but eventually. Some things are just meant to be." Thomas smiled and raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "Then I am grateful to fate for bringing you to me when it did. I am grateful for every day I have had with you, and I am grateful for every day I will have with you in the future." As they approached their 25th wedding anniversary in 1904, Thomas and Penelope began to think about the future of Thunder Creek Ranch in more concrete terms. Theo was now 25 himself, married to a lovely young woman named Elizabeth from a neighboring ranch, and they had just presented Thomas and Penelope with their first grandchild, a little girl named Rose. "It is time to start thinking about succession," Thomas said one evening. "Theo is ready to take on more responsibility, and Grace wants to open a school in Eureka. We should make sure everything is arranged properly, legally." They worked with a lawyer from Carson City to draw up papers that would ensure a smooth transition. Theo would inherit the bulk of the ranch, as he was the one who had dedicated his life to ranching. Grace would receive a substantial sum to support her school and her future endeavors. Samuel, still only 16 but already showing an interest in the horse breeding program, would receive the stables and the grazing land associated with them. "It is important that you all know you are equally loved," Penelope told her children when they gathered to discuss the plans. The division of assets has nothing to do with our affection and everything to do with your individual talents and desires. We want each of you to have the resources to build the life you want." "We know, Ma," Theo said, speaking for all three of them. "You and Pa have always been fair with us. And you have taught us that family is about more than money or land. It is about being there for each other, supporting each other's dreams." Thomas cleared his throat, clearly emotional. "Your mother and I did not have families growing up. Not really. We had to build our own, and you three are the best thing we ever created. The ranch is just buildings and cattle and land. You are our true legacy." The years continued their steady march forward. Grace did indeed open her school in Eureka, which quickly became known for its excellent education and progressive approach. Samuel took over the horse breeding program and turned it into a highly profitable business, shipping horses all over the West. Theo and Elizabeth had 3 more children, filling Thunder Creek Ranch with the sounds of grandchildren running and playing. Thomas and Penelope settled into a comfortable semi-retirement, still involved in the ranch's operations, but leaving most of the day-to-day decisions to Theo. They spent their time with their grandchildren, working in Penelope's extensive garden and taking long walks along Thunder Creek, reminiscing about their years together. "You have any regrets?" Thomas asked her one day when they were both in their 60s, sitting on the porch as they had done countless times before. "Anything you wish you had done differently?" Penelope thought about it seriously, looking back over the decades of her life. "I regret the years before I met you," she finally said. "I regret the time I wasted feeling sorry for myself, feeling worthless. But from the moment you found me in Eureka, no, I would not change a single thing. Not even that first cattle drive when you could barely walk for a week afterward." Thomas teased. "Not even that," Penelope confirmed, laughing. "Every hardship, every challenge, every moment of doubt and fear was worth it because it was part of our story. And our story is a good one, Thomas. It is the best story I could have hoped for." In 1908, on a beautiful spring day much like the one when Penelope had first arrived in Nevada, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. The whole family gathered at Thunder Creek Ranch. All 3 children with their spouses, 7 grandchildren ranging from toddlers to teenagers, and half the town of Eureka, who had come to honor the couple who had become pillars of their community. Martha Hayes, now elderly but still sharp as a tack, gave a speech about finding Penelope barely alive in her husband's clinic all those years ago. "I knew she was a fighter," Martha said, "but I did not know she was going to end up being one of the most important people in this whole county. She and Thomas built something special here, not just a successful ranch but a real home, a real family. They proved that it does not matter where you come from or what you have lost. What matters is what you build with the time you are given." When it was Thomas's turn to speak, he looked at Penelope with the same love and wonder he had shown her on their wedding day 3 decades earlier. "I am not much for public speaking," he said, "so I will keep this short. 30 years ago, I married the love of my life. She was a stranger I had found dying in the street, a woman who had lost everything. But she was also the strongest, smartest, most beautiful person I had ever met. She made my house a home, she gave me a family, and she turned a lonely ranch into a legacy. Everything good in my life traces back to her. So here is to Penelope Tucker, my wife, my partner, and my best friend. I love you more today than I did 30 years ago, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." There was not a dry eye in the house after that speech, including Penelope's own. When Thomas finished, she stood and kissed him in front of everyone, not caring who saw or what they thought. After 3 decades of marriage, She had long since stopped worrying about propriety when it came to showing her husband affection. That night, after all the guests had gone home and the children had taken the grandchildren to bed, Thomas and Penelope walked out to their favorite spot overlooking the ranch one last time. The moon was full and bright, illuminating the land they had worked so hard to build and maintain. "Do you remember what I said to you when you told me you had no family?" Thomas asked, pulling Penelope close against his side. "You said I did now," Penelope replied. "You said the ranch was as much mine as it was yours." "And I meant it," Thomas said. "Every word. You made this ranch into something greater than I ever could have alone. You made my life into something worth living, and you gave me a family I never dreamed I could have." "We gave each other everything," Penelope corrected gently. "That is the beauty of what we built, Thomas. Neither of us could have done it alone, but together we created something that will outlast both of us." They stood there for a long time, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that had lasted through 3 decades of joy and hardship, success and failure, laughter and tears. Behind them, the ranch house glowed with warm light, and they could hear the sounds of their family settling in for the night. Ahead of them, the land stretched out endlessly under the Nevada sky, a testament to their hard work and dedication. "Let us go home," Penelope finally said, echoing Thomas's words from so many years ago. "We are home," Thomas replied, gesturing at the land around them. "We have been home from the moment we found each other. Everything else is just details." But he let her lead him back down the hill anyway, back to the house where their children and grandchildren slept, back to the bed they had shared for 30 years, back to the life they had built together from nothing but determination and love. And as they walked, hands clasped like they had been since that first cattle drive so long ago, both of them knew with absolute certainty that they had found something precious and rare. They had found home. They had found family. They had found love. And it had all started with a lost woman dying in the street and a cowboy brave enough to offer her not just rescue, but belonging. A man who had looked at a stranger and seen not a burden but a partner. A man who had said with simple certainty, "You have family now. This ranch is yours as much as mine." He had kept that promise every single day since, and they had built a legacy together that would endure long after they were both gone. Their children would continue the work they had started, and their grandchildren after them, and the story of Thunder Creek Ranch and the love that had built it would be passed down through generations. But that night, as Thomas and Penelope settled into bed together, they were not thinking about legacy or the future. They were simply grateful for the present, for the warmth of each other's presence, for the knowledge that they were exactly where they were meant to be. "I love you," Penelope whispered in the darkness. "I love you too," Thomas replied. "Today, tomorrow, and always." And that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.